Good evening, and welcome to the Messy Desk studio, which is where I live and have my being, particularly during lockdown, where I seem to be in here umpteen hours a day. Okay, I think this idea started with a conversation with Mark about how people spend their time in lockdown. So I'd like to let you into my life and just say, well, and this is what I do, and oh, and by the way, this is what I do, and by the way, that's what I do, and so on. First off, let's get the golf bit over early, because I'm no golfer. I'm a very, very bad golfer, but there is a good deal of golf in my pedigree. I have, or rather had, because they're all dead now, two uncles and a great uncle who are actually golf professionals. And each of them has an interesting story. My great uncle Charles was lured from his native Channel Islands to become a professional at Romilly, which was then a new club on the outskirts of Manchester. And when he got there, he found that, okay, the club had acquired the land for the course, but they hadn't actually built the course. And his first duty as a professional was actually design the course for the club. So he set to and did it. And the course, albeit expanded, is still in use today. So he must have done a good job. I've not actually had the pleasure of playing it yet, but I will do on my next trip to Manchester for sure. Now, when he got there, as I said, he first duty was to do the course design. Second duty was to set up a club making operation, and he made the clubs, and I presume he bought the iron heads in forged and put everything together. I presume that's what club making meant in those days. But my first set of golf clubs actually had my name on them, which were all nice. I think my father gave them away when I was at university, but that's another story. Anyway, his eldest son, Charlie, became professional at a golf club called Heaton Moor, which again is on the outskirts of Manchester. And Charlie had his own claim to fame. For a long, long time, Charlie was the holder of the world record for holes in one, of which he'd had 31 in a long career, only 6 at his home club, so it wasn't just local knowledge. And he was in the Guinness Book of Records for a long, long time until I think a couple of Americans overtook him. I'm not sure what the record is now, but it was many, many years while he was there. The youngest son, Albert, was in his time a rising star. He was back in the 1930s, he won the North of England Championships 3 times, I think. He reached the semi-finals of the UK Match Play Championship, and he was a member of the Ryder Cup squad. Now, you notice I said squad, I didn't say team. Reason being that shortly before the Ryder Cup commenced, he was playing in some sort of match or tournament somewhere, and he caught this guy cheating 3 times. He was using the what I call the foot wedge for improving his lie. And Uncle Albert warned him and then warned him again. Eventually he decided to nothing to do but report him. Now, as luck would have it, this guy turned out to be a very senior official in the PGA. He was on the selection committee for the Ryder Cup, and really it's no wonder poor old Uncle Albert didn't make the team. So yeah, but a few years later, a very short time later, World War II took Albert away from golf for 6 years and effectively finished his tournament career. But I played on their courses when I was a kid. He squeezed us on at antisocial hours, maybe shouldn't mention that, but I played with my cousin Michael, my cousin Christine, and we played kiddywink tournaments sometimes. And by the time I was 18, it was quite reasonable. And then I went to university, realized how much golf cost to play in the real world, and also got interested in other things like sailing and playing a bit more rugby. And I gave golf up. And so it was for 50 odd years. And then took it back when my wife suddenly one day decided she wanted to play. And I said, okay, fine. I'll come and hack around the par threes with you, but don't ask me to buy a Pringle sweater. Hate Pringle sweaters. And don't ask me to join a golf club because I'm not a clubbable person. Which, of course, is why I'm here all those years later, having broken a resolution, although I still don't have the Pringle sweater, which Mark tells me have gone out of fashion. Anyway, there we go. Now, trouble was when I came back after this 50-odd year gap, I'd been used to playing what you might call adrenaline sports. I'd done a lot of top level dinghy sailing. I'd done played football to a reasonable standard. And if you lose it when you're in a regatta, you lose it when you're in a football pitch, nobody gives a damn. It's all part of life's rich pattern there. But as you know, on the golf course, that ain't so. And I had problems. I had real problems. Disappointment, because I thought I was going to be as good as I was when I was at 18. Disillusion when I realized I wasn't. And just generally, wound up the whole time. And I mustn't have been a great pleasure to play with. And luckily, I came to realize this. And so I got on the web and I Googled absolutely everything that I could find about anger management. There's about 14 pages worth. And I typed it all out and I distilled it down into a document that existed on 2 sides of a piece of A4. And then I laminated the document in plastic and I stuck it in the the glove compartments of the car. And then whenever I got to the golf club, I'd open the glove compartment and I'd take this out and I'd read it and I'd turn it over and read the other side. And then I'd turn it back and read it twice before I got out of the car to play my round. And know what? It worked. And I'm getting a lot more enjoyment out of my round. And I think people now sort of, well, sometimes enjoy playing with me and most of the time don't mind playing with me, which is a win-win situation. So I'm pretty philosophical about my bad golf these days. Anyway, the first thing that I did when lockdown started, I found I got plenty of time. I liked the fact that the Sunday Times compulsorily retired me because they couldn't afford to pay my fees. Lockdown entitled me to spend a fair bit of time researching family history, and it's been fascinating. I found second cousins I didn't know I had. I found uncles and aunts that I never knew existed. It hasn't been an easy process though, because my great-grandparents on my mother's side were what you might call boat people. They were sort of, I don't know, waterbound gypsies. My great-grandfather was a bargee on the canals in England, and his regular cargo was a consignment of china or delf from the potteries of Stoke-on-Trent, what they call the pot banks. And he ferried these up to Liverpool docks, where they were put aboard a vessel bound for the United States for export. On the return trip, he carried a cargo of lemons, and the lemons were destined not for the markets, but for the soapworks in Manchester. And my grandmother and some of her siblings, not all of them, were actually born on the barge, and they travelled up and down it. And the result of this is there is someone in every generation in our family who can eat a lemon with the same sort of relish that other people would reserve for oranges and tangerines. It's very odd. My grandmother could do it, my mother could do it, I can do it, and my 2 daughters. I'm not sure about my grandkids yet, but I'm sure somebody will emerge who can actually pick up a lemon and chew it. On the other side, on my, I know, but talking about my grandfather, because he married sorry, begin again there, my great grandfather, because he married an Italian girl. Now, what the girl from Milan was doing, wandering the banks of the Shropshire Union Canal, I have no idea. But anyway, they were married and they had children. And sadly, my great grandfather was killed when one day he slipped between the barge and the quayside, somewhere near Little Lee in Cheshire, and he was drowned. Now, the legend in the family was that there was drink taken, but that I can't, no idea how to verify or whatever. But my grandmother, who was a very strong lady, subsequently married again, a man much younger than herself this time, and eventually got fed up with him and left him at the ripe old age of 82. So my maternal grandfather, on the other hand, was a farming stock. He was on the Welsh borders, Montgomeryshire, as it was then. It's now been absorbed into massive Clwyd territories, the big Uber county. And farming was suffering a recession at the time. And my grandfather left the farm and went up to the coal mines of Lancashire in order to work as a coal miner, and more or less established the tradition of coal mining among the males in our family. I was probably lucky to escape. And on my father's side, we seem to be mainly labourers or soldiers, certainly down home, working class lads. And I found a bugler who was killed at the charge of Light Brigade. He's some sort of great uncle in the Crimean War. My great grandfather is described in 19th century census as a carter. Now, I don't know what that means, really. He could have been a haulage constructor. He could have been just somebody who drove a cart for the railways or whatever. And my grandfather, his son, likewise, was described as a carter as a lad. My father told me that his own grandfather was actually a bare knuckle boxer and wrestler, and he fought under the name of Wigan Bill. My grandfather's cartering, that got him into World War I. It got him a transfer from the Manchester Regiment, where he turned up to enlist with his pals, into the Royal Horse Artillery as initially a driver, and then as a gunner, which I found out was a promotion. And he went through Gallipoli, and from Gallipoli he went back to England for some R&R, and then he was sent off to the Somme, and he was badly wounded on the Somme and then shipped out as unfit for service. I don't know how unfit or what. I should have asked my grandmother before she died, but never got round to it. I had other interests in those days, I think. But anyway, he died. And my own father was exempt from service in World War II. He was a bit old for it, but he enlisted anyway, and he became a Air Force policeman. And they shot him off to Scotland to guard the bricks that they got reserved for some airfield, or something or other like that. Anyway, and he came, first time he came down back home. Somebody asked my mother, how was George? How do you find George after he's been up to Scotland? And my mother said, his golf had improved and he'd learned to dance. So make of that what you will. And I was actually born up there. Cottage hospital, not great facilities. So I was brought back down on the train to Manchester, and I went into a hospital, and they had to perform an emergency operation on me, and the nature of which I'm unsure about. I know certain things were involved, but But anyway, and the birth wasn't actually registered at the time. It was registered a few weeks later when everything normalized. And it was long years before I twigged. And I said to my mother, Mum, I said, if I was born in Scotland, like you said, how come that on my birth certificate it says Hazel Grove, Cheshire? And my mother thought about this, and then she smiled and she said, well, I don't suppose your father could pronounce or spell Kakubri. And that's another quirk of history. So that's my ancestry. Got Scots in there, English in there, Welsh in there, Italian. So I'm well qualified to play for the rugby teams if they actually need me. I'm leaving my phone on the way to the plane. But in a few short weeks anyway, I'm going to be an Irishman. They've offered me a place, as it were, but it's been referred for VAR at the moment, so we'll have to wait a few more weeks before the final jury makes its decision. I've only been here 34 years, but what the hell. Anyway, secondly, music, big part of my life. I owe much of this to my father's peacetime occupation. He was manager of a building called the Free Trade Hall, historically Manchester's premier concert venue, famous as the original home of the Halley Orchestra, also as the venue for the Sex Pistols' Northern debut, the concerts, the gig, I suppose, that sparked off bands like the Smiths and the Buzzcocks and got the whole Manchester music scene that was so vibrant in the 70s and 80s going. It was also the venue, and here the guy who was at the centre of it was seated in the dress circle, only about 20 feet from me. And Bob Dylan and his band are on the stage starting to play the second half of the concert. And this guy stands up and points at Bob Dylan and says, Judas. And Dylan says, I'm not. And it's created a quite great fame in the rock and roll annals, this concert. And it was privileged. The building is now the Radisson Hotel, but now it's in those days it was a concert hall. And then we grew up I grew up in an apartment on the top floor, and I had access to all the concerts and everything else that went on. And it was a pretty privileged existence because I got to experience a lot of different genres of music, and I got to meet a lot of musicians. Sir John Bar-Rowley, the famous conductor, is known to me, or was known to me when he was alive, as Uncle John. And I used to sit in his room as a sort of 14, 15-year-old, sit in his dressing room and listen to him playing for the cello, which he did for recreation. At the age of about 16, 17, I went drinking with a hard-bitten bunch of Chicago jazzmen, the sort of guys who carry their trombone in their hand because there's 3 bottles of whiskey in the trombone case, that sort of thing. Oh, real hard living stuff. I got taken out for dinner along with my parents by various visiting musicians, including John Danquith and Cleo Lane, particularly nice to us, and used to take us to the posh, the French restaurant at the Midland Hotel. Also Humphrey Littleton. I played chess on many occasions with Dizzy Gillespie. It's probably my favorite from the jazz fraternity. We had a lovely time. Thank you, Diz. And I got into trad jazz, I suppose, after skiffle, which I played in a group at school. I played T-chess bass initially, boom, 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 and then I played harmonica. And we were called the Woodshed Sinners because we practiced in this room behind the woodwork room at the school after hours, illegally. I don't know whether we'd stolen the key or something, but anyway, we all piled in there and played all this Lonnie Donegan stuff. And Then they got into traditional stuff. And of course, what you have when you join any of these cults, you have to have the sartoria. So I got the big cable stitch sweater down to the knees, and I got the sort of grubby jeans and the sandals and the pewter tankard, which we took to gigs, got it filled up in the bar. And then I went out to a friend's house one day, and he said, "You've got to hear this, you've got to hear this." And he put this record on, 78 RPM. And it was the Dave Brubeck Octet, very early modern jazz, recorded in 1952, I think. And it was The Way You Look Tonight on one side and Love Walked In on the other. And it was, I was just spellbound. It was Road to Damascus, if you like, for me. It was just, wow. So out goes the cable stitch, out go the sandals, out go the rest of it. Pewter tankard in the bin. In come the sort of long box cut chalk striped jackets and the parallel trousers and the beret and the dark glasses. And I tried to grow a little Thelonious Monk type goatee. I failed totally because of very fair skin. I couldn't grow anything in those days. And that was it. After university, I discovered folk music, and that became a big part of my life. And I ran and I sang at folk clubs in Manchester, Norwich, London, Hungerford in Berkshire. I also played in a ceilidh band called Famous O'Gorman, and there's a nice story about this. I had no idea who Famous O'Gorman was. I thought it was some sort of chieftain, legendary friend of Byron Baru, fought alongside him in battles, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it was only after I came to Ireland in 1987, I'm on the 18 bus, and we pull up Chelmsford Road, we pull up at the lights at Ranelagh, and I look out the window of the bus on the right-hand side there, and on this wall there's a fading poster. The poster says, "O'Gorman's famous sausages." And I thought, huh? So I got home, I got on the phone, I rang Tony, the guy who had started the band. I said, "Oh, how do you get the name for the band?" And he said, actually, I was on a weekend in Dublin a few years ago, and I was on a bus, and I saw this poster. That was it, QED. So anyway, and yeah, I love folk music. I still do. I love the tunes. Sometimes they're happy and bouncy. Sometimes they're dark and brooding. I love the lyrics of the mythology and sometimes the pure poetry. I love some of the sentiments. I mean, there's a wonderful song called Jim the Carter Lad, and it has the lyrics, last verse. I care nothing for politics, nor anything so great. I care not much for lofty talk about the church and state, but I do all right from man to man, and that's what makes me glad. You'll find there beats an honest heart in Jim the Carter Lad. And I've got a bit of a grow for that song because it's obviously with the Carters in my ancestry, but I don't know, it just seems proper sort of sentiments. And there are all sorts of things. They're improbable stories. Bride ditches husband at the altar and buggers off with old lover. It's a sort of 18th century version of The Graduate. And there's another one called Queen Eleanor's Confession, which reads like a Blackadder script. They're amazing. And then there's a story frequently recurring of the sailor who comes home from sea. And sometimes he's in disguise, and his girlfriend, who is A, maybe stupid, and B, maybe myopic, or C, maybe a combination of both, doesn't recognize him. And at some point he has to come leaping out the song and say, "Way, it's me, Jimmy, and I've come home from sea to marry thee." And they live happily ever after, that sort of thing. And this one is a particular favorite. I get the old guitar here. It's a particular favorite, and it's about a sailor who's home from sea, and he meets this girl who is abundantly beautiful. And they have a walk in the country, and then they lie down and make love. And then they get up, and she takes 50 quid out of her purse, gives him the 50 quid, and says, "Here, buy your mates a drink." I mean, just imagine if you're on a ship and you're going around Cape Horn, rocking from side to side, you're an absolute bastard behind you shouting at you. And, and you think in your mind's eye, you turn to this vision of this lovely girl who's going to give you 50 quid. Knockout. One morning in the month of May, down by your rolling river, oh, a jolly sailor I did stray, as I beheld some lover, carelessly along did stray, a viewing of the daisies gay, and so sweet she sang around the lake, just as the tide is flowing. Oh, a dress it was as white as milk, and jewels did on her, and the shoes they were crimson silk, just like some lady of honor. Cheeks were red, her eyes were brown, her hair in ringlets was hanging down. She'd a lovely brow without a frown, just as the tide was flowing. I made a bow and I said, "Fair maid, came you here so early? Oh, my heart by you it is betrayed, and I could love you dearly. I am a sailor come from sea, won't you accept of me company, where we'll walk and view the fishes play, just as the tide was flowing." No more was said, but on our way we walked along together, and the birds did sing, drums did play, and pleasant was the weather. And when we were weary, we sat down beneath the tree with the branches round, and what was done, that's all we found, as long as tides are flowing. She lay there on the grass, her colour did keep changing, and she cried out, "Sir lass, never let your mind be ranging. 20 guineas, or was it 50? I've in store, pray use it when you will, there's more. Jolly sailor I adore, as the tide is flowing." Oh, we both shook hands and off did steer, jumped our drinks, rum and brandy, and to keep his shipmates in good cheer, the lady's gold is so handy. And along with another pretty maid I'll go to a public house where the ale will flow. Success to the maid that will do so, just as the tide is flowing. besides the traditional stuff, I also actually compose songs. Until the recent lockdown, I was performing them, gigging on a regular basis under my pseudonym of Spike Lancaster. I had to invent Spike a few years ago when I was asked to write an agony uncle column for a woman's magazine. I got him out of the cupboard again when I recommenced gigging after a break of a few years. At the time, I was the restaurant critic for the Sunday Times, and I wasn't sure whether Rupert Murdoch would appreciate one of his scribes performing rather downbeat left field songs. So I didn't use my own name. Anyway, there's a song I wrote, it's based on a true story. I was playing a gig with a blues band at a club venue. It was a sort of all things to all people type of club. Gambling, dining, live music, stripper, that sort of place. And in front of the stage, there was a celebration going on. And I looked out, I saw this nondescript sort of guy walking up the hall, grey mat, trilby, and he made us out to shake hands with this guy who was celebrating. And then with the other hand, he pulls out a gun and goes bang, 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 and the guy falls dead. And the guy with the shooter just walks out slowly the way he came, disappears into the night. I left town next day. I went to work in London. I never really did catch up with the story and see if anybody's arrested for the crime. But anyway, and the same band provided a nucleus of another band that hosted my short career as a professional musician. Lasted exactly 4 weeks, and of which 2 weeks were spent traveling to and from the venue. But that's another story. And maybe if somebody at the club wants to buy me a pint one day, they can have that one. And so in the 1970s, I was working for a regional newspaper in the UK. And my editor came up to me, he came into an editorial meeting one day, and he said, "My son-in-law tells me wine is the coming thing. Who knows anything about wine?" So I'm bunging my hand up. I do. So I said, "Okay, you're our wine correspondent, and while you're at it, you might as well review restaurants." So, wow. I thought, woo, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Still do, really. And I said, one question. Do I still have to do dog shows and mill fires and bankruptcies and that sort of thing? He said, "Yes, you bloody well do." So, did it. And I've always been interested in food as far as I can remember. My mother worked in the industry, in the hospitality industry. I had aunts with hotels, guest houses, pubs with rooms. Every school holiday from 12 upwards, I was farmed out to one of them, usually working in the kitchen. Now, I had got a pretty good grounding in the art of chefery. And my venue of choice was always my Auntie Ethel's Hotel in Lake District, partly because of the pleasantness of the venue, but also because she was a quirky, fun character, and also a skilled cook, which was the term for female chef in those unenlightened days. And we got on very well. Now, before we went up there, she'd ring me up and she'd say, "Right, I want you to go to Sammy Black's Delicatessen for me, and I need some fresh salmon, I need some smoked salmon, I need some salami, I need some gherkins, I need various spices, I need cumin, I need this, I need that." And also, then after that, I had to go to Messrs. Forsyth Brothers on Deansgate and bring back all the latest sheet music, piano music, all the latest show tunes. So I had to sit on this bus for, in those days, it took about nearly 5 hours to get up to Lake District. Went through every town in South Lancashire on the way, no motorway. And I'm sat in the middle of the back seat, and where you get your legs out in the aisle. And I got all this stuff, smoked Simon Gherkin, and then the sheet music on top. So I'm sat there rigid for about 4.5, 5 hours. And then I'd get off with a stiff pain in my neck, and my uncle would dump the stuff in his car, and we'd travel across the hills to the hotel. And I think in my culinary education, I'm lucky enough to be brought up in Manchester, a cosmopolitan city, a melting pot of various cultures. So I had Jewish friends, Indian and Pakistani friends in the days when Indians and Pakistanis could be friendly, Polish friends, Hungarian friends, Portuguese, Italian, Chinese, all of them students, or most of them anyway, students like myself. And we organised this informal Sunday luncheon club where anybody who was in town and fancied feeding could go around to somebody's house and get a meal usually affected in the cultural style. Like Zé's aunt, who was Portuguese, used to give us great big paella type concoctions. And Full and Flav, the 3 Italian sisters, their mum used to taught me how to make ragu. And the whole experience broadened my culinary horizons. I came to Dublin in 1987, and it was Bleaksville, really. There were you could barely get olive oil except in a pharmacy. Compared to Manchester, it was very monocultural, really quite boring. And I brought with me several ingredients. I gave, in order to keep body and soul together in those days, because I didn't really have many connections, I gave cooking lessons from home under the aegis of one man and his pots. And I brought with me things like tamarind paste and pomegranate syrup and star anise, the lemon myrtle that people never seen here. And they marveled at it. In fact, I passed around the star anise, bowl of star anise, for them to have a look at it and sort of see what it was. And when bowl came back to me, they'd eaten them all, just bunching away on the star anise, because they thought that's what you had to do. But anyway, and then in the mid-90s, I opened a cafe in Dublin, which in its day upped the ante for coffee. Nobody was making coffee anything near as good as we were. And we ran the place for 3 years, made no money whatsoever. But there was a good spin-off. Having put my money where my foodie mouth was, it gave me huge credibility when I finally, in 1999, joined Food and Wine magazine and came to write about restaurants. And remember, here we are, remember Food and Wine magazine in its heyday? This isn't actually a cover. This is a cod cover done for me as a leaving present. And it has a headline which says, "Sax mad, brassy Brit proves over 60s can blow all night." Yeah, right. And it says free 300 of Ernie's finest anecdotes inside, and various other things. The whole thing is entitled "Where's Whalley?" And there is a picture of me in a deck chair on a beach in Minorca, reading a book, and with my right nipple exposed to the Mediterranean air. And this arose out of a fairly alcoholic night, one night with, I think, with Dee O'Keefe, who edited You magazine, and Jen Stevens, who edited Irish Tatler. There may have been 1 or 2 more there. But I bet them that Food and Wine would be the first of the magazines in the group to show a nipple in their pages. And they took the bet. And in my last issue, I swapped my normal editorial mugshot for this picture of me and said, "There you go. I gather the proprietor wasn't terribly impressed by this, not very amused at all, but sure, we've Nora and I have made up, and we're still speaking, and I think we enjoyed working together overall. So there. Anyway, I was there for 7 years, the last 4 as editor, and the highlights are absolutely immense. I mean, can you imagine you're in breakfast, you're having breakfast in Paris, you're drinking Mumm champagne. From there, you go to get the TGV and you go down to Bordeaux, and shortly afterwards, you're having lunch at Chateau Cheval Blanc, accompanied by several vintages. In the evening, you get on a bus and you go to Chateau d'Yquem for dinner, and you sample their lovely dessert wines, all in one day. I mean, God. There are loads of more memories. There's enjoying a 24-course dinner at the Palace of Versailles, in Louis XIV's dining room, attended by waiters in 16th century, flunkies in 16th century garb, and operating by 16th century rules. So if you put your glass, what we're drinking Dom Perignon 72, I think, and you put your glass down on the table, and suddenly it was whisked away. It didn't matter, because all you did was go like that, and another one arrived. Magic. Yeah, 24-course meal next door to the Hall of Mirrors, where the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Only 80 people at that dinner, and it will never ever be repeated, apparently. And I was there. Oh wow. I went every second year, to a festival in Adelaide called Tasting Australia, not necessarily because of my journalistic skills, but because of I was one of those people in those days who could party till 3 and still be on the bus for 8. And also because I played a bit of guitar, and Ian Parmenter, the organizer of the festival, was a blues harmonica player. So natural partnership. And during that time, on occasion, I actually went swimming off Kangaroo Island, South Australia, swimming with packs of dolphins, wild dolphins. I mean, just surreal. New Orleans for Mardi Gras, that was another great one. It was just superb. But anyway, all that's over with. Retirement and the lockdown has left me with plenty of time for my other hobby, which is cooking. Now, years ago, I built a pizza oven in my back garden, so I spent ages and ages and ages trying to perfect both my pizza dough and my fire tending, working hard on that one. I worked hard on my risotto technique. This is a hark back to my Italian antecedents. I also make my own sausages, yogurt, bread, burgers. I make my own gin from infusing arbutus varies in vodka with various botanicals. The arbutus varies from the tree in the garden. I'm learning to brine meats. This is Manchester for me again. All my Jewish friends, they got me in my sort of late teens into salt beef, and I've been a lover of salt beef ever since. And it's so hard to get unless you do it yourself. So basically, let me just leave you with some tips on risotto, because I've studied this quite hard. And I had a very, very good teacher, Luciano Parolari, who is the chef, or was the chef, I think he might have retired. He was the chef at Villa d'Este, the lovely hotel on Lake Como where Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor spent their honeymoon. And I had a whole afternoon of him to myself, working on risotto together. First tip, wooden spoon. Don't use metal spoon for it. He was most insistent about that. Second tip, the best rice you can get, which he reckons, and I reckon subsequently, is carnaroli. You can also use Violone Nano or Arborio Superfino. Those are your grades, but also use the best olive oil you can. It's a simple technique. My favorite risotto is a prawn and leek one. Now I know there are some dietary restrictions involved here. You can leave the prawns out. You can use mushrooms instead of prawns. That works really well. And I always like to use, instead of putting salt in it, I used to use a chopped rasher of bacon. So I kick it off with some olive oil in the pan, heat the olive oil, chop up about half a large size onion, throw that in, throw the bacon in, stir it round until the onions sort of go yellowy. No more than that. You don't want to caramelize them. And then you throw in a glass of wine and you turn the heat up, and then you start adding your liquid, feeding your liquid, good chicken stock. If you've got any you made yourself, all the better. Feed, feed, feed. When the chicken stock's gone, you need more liquid, there's boiled water. And keep feeding. You can also put in at this point, I like to put in a few grains of saffron. I like to put in a little pinch of herbs. It can be anything, thyme, rosemary out of the garden. It can be a bit of dried oregano. And again, stir, stir, stir. Don't let it stick to the bottom. Don't let it stick to the sides. Keep rubbing around with your wooden spoon. Add the liquid, add the liquid. Keep it down at a simmer at this stage. About 20 minutes, you're there. And at the end, a knob of butter. Oh, sorry, I should perhaps mention that you throw the rice in after the onions, and you stir that for a couple of minutes without adding any liquid. You put a knob of butter in at that stage and another knob of butter in the end. You're looking for a soupy texture, but not like a bit of rice drowning in soup. That's the way I like risotto. You know what I like it bone dry, you have it bone dry, but that's the way I like it. You can, I mean, your ingredients, the masses of ingredients you can use. I add gratings of Parmesan cheese at the end, and sometimes a little bit of orange zest, which is the way my wife likes it. I can live without the Parmesan, although I do like Parmesan, but on a particular recipe. And just one final word on the rice, al dente. It's a much abused word. Now, to my mind, it doesn't mean chalky, it doesn't mean gritty, it doesn't mean grainy. It means just absolutely to the point where the grain and the chalkiness are gone. No more, you don't want mush, but just, you can catch it just on that point of turn where the rice is a whole entity without this little kernel of gritty stuff or grainy stuff or pasty stuff in the middle. That for me is perfect. So thank you very much for having me tonight.